Look, you know what you clicked on, so I'm not going to bore you with an intro. Instead, I'll establish some context around how I'll rank these weapons, and why you should even listen to what I'm saying. For credentials, I've P-ranked every stage on Brutal difficulty and have gotten in the top 500 of Cybergrind multiple times, with my current personal best being Wave 71 on Brutal. As for the context of the ranking, I'll be basing on both typical stages and the Cybergrind on Brutal difficulty, merely because the viability of certain lands becomes more important the higher you go up in difficulty, and also because Brutal difficulty unlocks new options in terms of counterplay, such as tripping gutter tanks becoming a Firestarter exclusive action. One more thing to note before I go to actual rankings is the tiers. Instead of a traditional S to D tier list format, I'm dividing the weapons into 4 tiers. Niche or usable is for weapons that, while aren't that bad, definitely are more niche in their use. Strong option covers weapons that can hold their own but aren't the peak of their category. Best in slot is what it says in the box. It's the best possible option you have within this category of weapons. And finally, best in game covers options that are genuinely overpowered in some way, either through sheer damage or other powerful utilities. Also, this tier list is not meant to influence your weapon choice, but rather provide an informed opinion about the power rankings of every weapon. Alright, you got all that? Good. Let's start this tier list right, with a hot take. The default Piercer is easily the most overhated option in the game, and it's not even close. If anything, this is a better option than a far more popular Slab Piercer in most situations. However, that debate will be saved for a little bit later. So let's look at the default Piercer's own merits right now. The standard fire will purely be used in the first levels. However, the far more important part of the weapon is the alternate fire, which can serve as mediocre fodder clear or great long-range damage against enemies with heads, as it will deal 3 damage on body shot, 4.5 on limbs, and 6 on head, which is only 2 shy away from a Railcannon. What it does better than the Railcannon, however, is a fast recharge of 2.5 seconds, which seems like nothing when constantly swapping through weapons. You can rack up numerous headshots against sentries, mind flayers, ferrymen, and especially guttermen. As one final benefit, it's a low commitment, long range weapon that can be fired and then immediately be forgotten about. Overall, the default Piercer is a strong option that deserves a far better stats than it currently has. Moving on from the hottest take to the coldest, the default Marksman is undeniably busted. Without any combos, it's free damage on whatever was unlucky enough to be the closest target, and split coins act as alright crowd clearer. However, where this weapon shines are the number of combos this coin has. Fistful of dollars can immediately double the value of a coin and set it up in more advantageous positions. The alt fires of other revolvers can deal high single target damage for a low cost. The Jumpstart gets additional hits when a coin is idly floating by. The Electric Railcannon can now hit multiple times thanks to coins, and even certain enemy attacks can be redirected for massive damage with chargebacks. There's definitely some other combos or techniques I missed, but you get the point. The Marksman is overpowered in every sense of the word, and rightly claims its place at the top of the tier list. With our final default revolver, the Sharpshooter is a weapon that shows a lot of potential, but is also heavily limited by environmental factors. In a tight room with enemies clumped near each other, that's great. But if the place you're fighting in has a high ceiling or none at all, then it's hard to get value out of this weapon, as the initial hit of the alternate fire only does 1 damage, with additional damage being only granted on bounces. Besides the typical bouncing effect that Sharpshooter has, it has a few other utilities, such as being able to destroy enemy projectiles, which is very useful for one-shotting Maurices. Additionally, it's a pretty good pair of coins, as punching an enemy to an enemy below and then shooting it allows for free double hits, which is especially good against sentries and sword machines. Overall, it's a good option, but one I can't put higher than niche, as that's the best way to describe this weapon's role in the arsenal. That's the revolver's done, but what about their alternate variants? First, we have the Slab Piercer, which is no contest the most popular alternate variant. If you look at the surface level details, it's not hard to see why. For one, its regular fire has some use, as it's a quick way to deal 2.5 damage, which is always nice to have as an option. However, the real draw of the weapon is the alternate fire, which deals 5 damage outright, no strings or other skill requirements attached. It also has additional guaranteed piercing damage, which is yet another neat bonus this weapon has. And to cap all of this off, thanks to the special bonuses the ultimate fire weapons get in place of a split coin, the Slab Piercer can do incredibly high damage when combined with coins, making it incredibly popular with speedrunners. However, despite what the community may tell you, it does have some downsides. For one, it has double the recharge time of its default variant, meaning that it loses out in sustained damage and you might not end up pulling it out when you're not ready. This would not be a deal breaker on its own, but the second main downside is the lack of locational damage, meaning that while a slab user will deal 5 damage and be waiting 5 more seconds for the next shot, a default piercer user will deal 6 damage and only need to wait half the time, meaning that when the slab is halfway charged, the default will have fired off another shot, meaning it now has a 7 damage lead. Granted, this gets messier with weapon swapping and different targets getting the picture and one-shots, but hopefully you get the point. The default piercer is better for sustained damage against targets that can be headshot, and the slab is better for raw burst damage against all targets. Both are good options, but it's dishonest to say that one is entirely better than the other, while leaving out its upsides, like some people will do. Overall, the Slab Piercer serves as tough competition for its default variant. It is likewise a very solid option. The Slab Marksman has been a weird case for the community for a while. It made a de facto meme weapon until its semi-recent buff enabling instant shot recovery, which also carries over to the other slab revolvers. The main draw of the Slab Marksman is that the individual coins can now do more damage than would normally be split shots, trading crowd clear for raw damage. However, the important part is that this also carries to the other slab revolvers, and most importantly, their charge shots too. Hence why the Slab Piercer is great with coins. This doesn't apply to the standard revolvers, as the default Piercer and Sharpshooter can't get split shots with their alternate fires. So in most cases, if you want the best of both worlds, the default Marksman is the better choice. However, it's still undeniably a powerful option that outclasses the other slab revolvers for general power, so it's still getting the honor of being the best in slot. For a final weapon in the revolver slot, it's the Slab Sharpshooter, which actually has some interesting differences between its default variant. For one, it has only 1 shot instead of 3, but it charges up instantly, which is a neat sacrifice of sustained versus usage on reaction, which latter can be useful as a pseudo parry. Another thing is how the typical slab differences interact with the alternate fire, as the Slab Sharpshooter starts out doing more raw damage. However, the higher damage on the bounces combined with the headshots result in the default Sharpshooter doing more potential damage. Then again, the default Sharpshooter has 3 times the shots, making it an interesting choice between faster reactions or more sustained damage. Personally, I still go with the default Sharpshooter, but it's still a toss-up between which is better. Maybe the Slab Sharpshooter joins its brother in the niche tier. That's it for the revolvers, time to move on to something new. To start with the shotguns, I'd like to preface by saying that the shotguns in general are very powerful, due to their naturally high DPS thanks to shotgun swapping. Additionally, projectile boosting allows for a better ranged option that still has a place because rockets require precision and can be shot down by guttermen. If all that wasn't enough, you can parry with it. In other words, the shotgun is very good at base, but we also need to consider the alternate fire. The Cortex grenade is an unfortunate victim of power creep, as the previous main upside it had over other explosives now belongs to the rocket launcher too. Meaning the only time you'll wanting to be shooting a core mid-air is when there's no fodder around for easy explosive damage, but then again that's still a relatively common scenario. Another niche that this weapon hasn't been outclassed in yet is core nukes, where combining either the Malicious Railcannon or using an actual malicious phase laser if you're good at the game to create a massive explosion, wiping out most fodder and heavily damaging other targets. One could argue that this has also been power crept to an extent thanks to the introduction of other weapons we'll mention later, but I feel this is good enough that it ends up saving the core eject from the niche tier and puts it at the bottom of a strong option. In stark contrast to this, the pump shotgun is undeniably powerful, although for the starting stats it wouldn't look that way. Instead of firing 12 shots all dealing 0.25 damage each, the pump shotgun fires only 10, making it 0.5 less total damage. In exchange, it reloads faster, but that's hardly an upside when shotgun swapping exists. What is an upside is the ability to pump the shotgun, which turns the 10 pellets of the pump shotgun into 60 with a total of 4 damage, and 2 pumps will result in 24 pellets adding up to 6 damage. Basically, with a bit of preparation you would get high burst damage, with the most notable usage of this being the classic Maurice 2-shot combo. Sure, you get more spread with each pump as a downside, but it's a shotgun. If you're not in someone's face while using it, why even bother? However, the real downside comes when you pump the shotgun one too many times, as now the shotgun will cause a powerful explosion that will damage anyone unfortunate to be caught in the blast radius, including you. But once again, this downside can be bypassed by simply dashing during the explosion, reaping the rewards of high explosive damage while being completely unharmed, this tactic being great at killing Virtue specifically. Overall, a very powerful option that is undoubtedly the best in the slot. Finally, to the sawed-on shotgun, which easily is the strangest alternate fire of the three, which is going to be a trend with the red weapons. For one, it has 2 modes of either being a melee option that is good for quickly regenerating health, which deals around 4.5 damage per second, or a projectile that can be juggled with the blue arm or attached to the red arm that deals 1.5 damage per hit with around 3.4 hits on contact. It sounds complicated, however the main usage of this weapon is pretty simple, as it excels in 2 categories: clumped enemy groups and large targets, as both end up falling to the numerous hits of the chainsaw. Additionally, the chainsaw also connects electricity, making it a very useful combo weapon. While a sawed-on shotgun can be tricky to use, it can also be very rewarding, which is why I'm putting it in strong option. Speaking of inherently tricky to use options, it's time to cover the jackhammers. Instead of firing immediately like every other weapon, the jackhammer needs to be charged up before being able to properly fire, meaning you end up losing out on some quick swap damage. However, what makes up for it in this regard is how the damage scales with speed. While not moving or moving at low speeds, it only does 3 damage, same as the regular shotguns. At moderate speeds, it does 6 damage. But at the highest speeds possible, the jackhammer will deal 10 damage, enough to one-shot Virtues, at the cost of a 7-second long overheat period. Additionally, any high-speed hit will result in you getting launched in the opposite direction, which has its own ups and downs. But enough of the regular fire. Let's go on to the core eject variant. Unlike the shotgun version, which has a typical grenade arc, the jackhammer fires the core eject directly in front of you, with the projectile inheriting your bathtub. On one hand, core snipes and nukes are now a lot more cumbersome and put you in more danger, but on the other hand, you gain access to a new projectile attack by boosting the core forwards with the jackhammer, doing 7 damage, which is only 1 away from a Malicious Railcannon. In fact, if you manage to launch a rocket into a core somehow, you can end up getting nukes off needing a Railcannon or a Maurice. However, it does require some time and standing still, so it's still dangerous in its own right. That being said, all of these upsides are also shared by the core eject, with the core snipes not only doing equivalent damage to core boosts, but the ray explosions allow it to harm more enemies. I feel the jackhammer ends up making one action more convenient only to make the most important one, those being core nukes, more of a hassle, which is why I feel it belongs in the niche tier, as the other jackhammers do the job better and are generally less intrusive. One example being the pump jackhammer. If the jackhammer excels at single target burst damage, then the pump variant further leans into this niche. Unlike its shotgun brother, it has no damage penalty, meaning you won't have to coverize base damage if you decide not to pump. But if you're going to use the weapon as intended, you'll achieve great results, as pumping once will increase the low speed damage to 6, the medium speed damage to 9.5, and the high speed damage to 13.5. Oddly enough, the second pump doesn't actually do anything other than being a bridge to over pumps, which adds a 3 damage ray explosion, which allows you to deal the maximum damage for a single hit in Ultrakill, that being 16.5 total damage. In other words, the jackhammer is now better at erasing single enemies off the map, which unquestionably places it best in slot, as a good competitor to the pump shotgun, depending on if you value burst or sustained damage. Our last Jackhammer is probably the least interesting to talk about, as the Ultra fire is functionally the same besides the fact that chainsaw and hammer can be charged and fired regardless of the status of the other. Other than that, almost everything I said about the sawed-on shotgun applies, so the choice comes down to which primary fire you want, making the sawed-on jackhammer the safest pick to integrate a jackhammer into your arsenal, making it an overall strong option. That's all the shotgun variants covered. Now onto the nail guns. The nail gun is unique into Ultrakill arsenal by the fact it's an automatic weapon, which each nail does around 0.2 damage, which is made up for the aforementioned high fire rate. However, the fire rate doesn't give it the best DPS, and it's not helped by both the spread and limited ammo of the weapon. Thankfully, this spread can be mitigated by a secondary fire of this weapon, that being the magnets. A versatile tool that can either make nails and rockets hoe onto an enemy, or set up traps by using stray nails or saws. Oh yeah, you could also pin enemies to walls. It's kind of useless, but it's still really funny. One more property that's shared by both nails and magnets is conductivity, meaning that electricity can either cause more damage to a target or be spread out to a horde of enemies. Keep this in mind, it's going to be really important later. To summarize, the Attractor Nailgun is a good utility weapon that comes with a lot of the sandbox and is generally a strong option. Now let's move on to one of the weapons it combos well with. The Overheat Nailgun doesn't seem too promising at the start, as it has slightly less damage per nail than the Attractor, but it's also applied to the pump shotgun. Look how powerful it is. With the Overheat Nailgun, firing the weapon allows an overheat state where the fire rate is set into overdrive, with the state immediately being able to be accessed by firing another nailgun for a fraction of a second. This makes the Overheat Nailgun very good at general burst damage, especially when combined with magnets for better accuracy or setting up traps. It also sets husks on fire, with the most notable one being Sisyphean and S.R.S, which are massive in size and take 2 times the edge when on fire, meaning overheat will often spell the end for these hulking monstrosities. It may be linear in its use, but having a lot of damage is always simple, so it ends up getting in the second highest tier. Notice my choice of language on how I did say best in slot, because I'd be lying if I said that. The true best in slot goes to the Jumpstart Nailgun, which is an absolute crowd clear beast. By staying a jumper cable onto an enemy, either staying in range for long enough or outright killing whatever you decide will be your target, everything in the air that enemy will receive an electrical shock, including the enemy if you didn't already kill it. Furthermore, having a cable attached increases the fire rate of this weapon. This would already be powerful on its own, but it becomes even stronger with how you can make it more powerful or cover more area. For more damage, nails are your main option, but to increase range and hits, you've got magnets, rockets, the saw, and yes, even coins combo with it. The best part about it is that the cooldown isn't even that long, as it's the same cooldown for the Slab Piercer for core nuke levels of crowd clear. Granted, it does take some time and additional resources to set up, but damage this strong is too good to ignore. To top all of this, it's still good for single turret, as doing a guaranteed 10 damage is always great. This weapon single-handedly saves the other nailgun options and secures a spot among the best weapons. Speaking of great weapons, the next ones up on the chopping block are the Sawblades, both literally and figuratively. The Attractor Sawblade is yet another super popular alternative weapon, and once again for very good reason. If the Jumpstart didn't exist, the nailguns would basically become irrelevant. First of all, the projectiles are much stronger, dealing 0.66 for the standard saws and 0.75 for the Attractor's silver saws, and while the fire rate isn't as high, it doesn't need to be. Secondly, instead of humming onto a magnet, the Sawblades rotate it, covering a lot more area while sacrificing some potential single target damage. Finally, the saws can hit 3 times, resulting in a total of 2.25 damage with the Attractor saws. This makes the Attractor Sawblade launcher to be an amazing crowd clear tool, as it deals a lot of area damage, is good against light and heavy targets, and doesn't take that much skill to use. The only things that are less desirable about it is that you can't hit enemies with magnets and how conductivity works. But other than that, an incredibly powerful option that gets the best in slot category. Our next option, the Overheat Sawblade, is also strong but very simple. You get the same 0.66 damage Sawblades. However, firing an Overheat will fire a single heated Sawblade that does 1 damage which hits up to 21 times, compared to the 2 hits of the standard saw and the 3 of the silver saw. Also, it sets stuff on fire, that's another important part. Once again, Overheat builds instantly if you fire another one of the nail guns or the saw blades, meaning you'll be able to access a very powerful trap option. However, it suffers a bit against single turrets, as you'll need to require a lineup of magnet beforehand, or you'll need to be in an area with walls. But if you manage to get, well, it'll do a lot of damage. Otherwise, the Overheat Nailgun is a more reliable single target option, and the Attractor is better overall for traps and crowd clear, but that doesn't mean the Overheat Saw is a strong option in its own right. For our final choice, we have the Jumpstart Sawblade, which has similar properties with the cable, but the part we have to discuss is the differences in interaction between nails and saws. Nails, as we already know, result in additional conductor damage, however saws decrease the time the shock will take to activate. Essentially, it's a trade-off of raw power versus speed. However, a lot of the time, skilled users can benefit from a longer activation time by setting up more conductive objects, and any danger this puts the user into is offset by the fact you're getting all hard damage erased once the Jumpstart goes off, due to the high style you'll gain. Additionally, there's another way of reducing the timer, which is just killing the enemy the cable is attached to. Overall, the Sawblade has generally worse synergy with the Jumpstarter, however the general effect is too powerful to ignore, so I'm putting it in best in slot, which today is becoming more meaningless the further we go on. Questionable tier names aside, we've got more weapons to cover, which thankfully don't have any alternate variants. The Electric Railcannon is probably the most straightforward weapon in the game, to the point the game gives it to you and you immediately know what to do. It's an infinitely piercing hit scan weapon that does 8 damage and a hefty 16-second cooldown. It's already good as a general big damage tool that can be used for killing multiple medium and high health enemies in a row, but where it really shines is the combo potential. With coins, you can hit a single enemy multiple times with the cannon, resulting in massive damage. For crowd clear, the Electric Railcannon is blatantly conductive, so some nails and magnets can result in the beam ending up catching strays, literally and figuratively. A powerful option that has stood the test of time that ends up claiming a position in best in slot. Going for a consistently strong option to the original meme weapon, we have the Screwdriver. This used to be seen as nothing more than a crutch for new players and an occasional use against mind flayers. However, the new changes that allow for juggling the drill between different targets have given it a new niche, which is for dealing with a lot of medium to high health targets in the same sightline. It's still also really good for its additional niches against hideous masses and mind flayers, as the latter gets your teleport removed by the driller, but now you can quickly eliminate hordes of malicious faces or virtues, while dealing great damage to other turrets as a finisher. That being said, there are still 2 things holding this weapon back: the cost and the skill required. The cost is self-explanatory, as it shares the same cooldown with the rest of the rail cannons, but the skill cost is a bit more abstract. While core nukes and rail coins can be consistently practiced like a science, the art of drill juggling isn't really one, as it heavily depends on enemy positioning, terrain, small movements of the enemies, the risk of fodder blocking the shots, the possibility of aiming blind on certain enemies, and the fact that the arc is tricky to aim. Combined with the aforementioned cooldown, it's a gamble to pull this thing out. It's probably the best of the niche options, but it's still a bit niche nonetheless. For our last Railcannon, we have the Malicious Railcannon, which goes in a different direction from the other variants. Unlike the previous two focusing on damaging enemies in rows, the Malicious Railcannon focuses on high explosive damage, meaning it's better for more spread out crowds. However, where this weapon achieves its full potential is when combined with the shotgun's core grenade, as you gain access to an incredibly powerful explosive that will clear out entire hordes. It's a very linear way to use a weapon, However, it's a fast and consistent way to deal high AoE that you can't really go wrong with. Me, it safely gets a spot and strong option. Alright, now it's time for the final section of the weapons. Took us long enough. Starting off, we have the Freezeframe, which sets an impossibly high standard for the rest of the rocket launchers. First off, we have the Primary Fire, which deals 3.5 damage on grounded hits and naturally flying enemies, with 7 damage red explosions on air shots. However, the real power of this weapon comes from the Alternate Fire, which freezes all rockets in place, including those of enemies. Additionally, your own rockets become more powerful when frozen for long enough, causing high damage setups. This would be good on its own, but what makes this weapon truly overpowered is the capability for rocket riding. Without the freeze frame, rocket riding becomes a risky option only done while falling, but with the freeze frame, you're good at some of the best mobility in the game for the cost of a single rocket and a bar of stamina. I cannot stress how powerful this amount of mobility is. As most projectiles are too slow to hit you, it can travel to the upper end of the range without much risk needed. Granted, it takes some practice to nail down instant rocket rise, but once mastered, every encounter in an open space becomes significantly easier. Possibly the best weapon in the game for this reason. Therefore, gains the honor of being a top tier weapon. Moving to a more reasonable option, we have the S.R.S. cannon. The Ultrakill fires a cannonball that does 5 damage when regularly fired or boosted, but does 7 when parried after already hitting an enemy, resulting in a total of 12 damage. This would make for a powerful yet committal combo that excels at killing Cerberus and Virtues, but thanks to a special combo that allows you to immediately dunk the cannonball right after it hits a target, it becomes a lot more reliable and powerful as a result. Additionally, the cannon can also stun specific insurrectionists, for either a short duration if you hit them while grounded, or for a long time if you hit them while falling, giving it another nice counter to a powerful enemy. Solid option, not much else to discuss. Alright, time for the final weapon. The Firestarter's first unique quality is the fact that the Ultrakill fire has an instant swap speed. You can fire it as soon as it's out. This is even better considering how powerful the Ultrakill fire can be, as it sprays gasoline to be set across the environment or enemies. The gasoline oil will only make the ground slippery, which can set up the gunnerman for parries, but the real value comes from setting the gasoline on fire, creating some of the best crowd clear in the game. Sure, the fire will also damage you, but that's what rocket riding is for, so you don't need to touch the ground, at least not for now. As for covering enemies on fire, it's a bit more niche. However, it's still very powerful against certain priority targets like the Sisyphean Insurrectionist and the Hideous Mass. If you want some more elaboration, I made a video on this weapon, but for now, putting it in the second highest tier will say enough about the power of this weapon, because Best in Slot has now lost all of its meaning. With that, we're done. Here's a clear look at the tier list I just made so you can see all the placements without any distractions. Before we go, I'd like to remind you, this is a tier list focused on general gameplay and cyber grind on brutal difficulty, so this tier list may be irrelevant with certain playstyles like speedrunning or playing on a lower difficulty. If you have any questions about certain tier placements or want more information on a weapon, feel free to comment, I might end up responding, who knows. That's all I really have to say for now, so thanks for watching this whole day, and hopefully I'll see you again. Goodbye.